moment. It's actually long overdue. My name is Jamaal Bowman. I'm the Congressman representing New York 16th District. I represent the Valley and the Northeast Bronx, as well as Southern Westchester County. So when we talk about the birthplace of hip hop, I literally represent where hip hop was born. And some of you know me in the audience, you know how important the art, the culture, the history, and the magic of hip hop is to my identity, to how I was raised, to my health and well-being, and to how I govern. Before I get started, I just want to thank a few people. First and foremost, none of us can do this job alone. And so I have to thank my incredible staff that's sprinkled throughout the audience. Can y'all stand up? My staff, stand up and say hello, please. It's you too. Right. I'm the one that shows up for the photo ops, but they do all the work behind the scenes. I also want to thank our panelists. A couple of them, are friends who became brothers, and now we're allies and co-conspirators in the revolution to transform America as we know it. So I want to thank panelist Kevin Lyles for his continued leadership on this issue and so many others. I want to thank Brother Prophet and BMAC for their continued organizing. And I want to thank the two people who might be the most important on the panel, the two authors and researchers of the book, Rap on Track. If you did not read the book yet, please pick this book up and read it. It is transformative. Miss Andrea L. Dennis, who's waiting, and Mr. Dr. Eric Nielsen, both co-authors of the book, Rap on Track. I also want to thank our moderator, Sister Shay Lawson, for agreeing to moderate this panel. Thank you so much. Looking forward to an incredible conversation. So over the last decade or so, there have been 500 cases in which rap lyrics have been used to prosecute and indict artists. Over the last decade or so. When you compare that to other genres of music, I believe the number is 5 or so. And in all of those cases, all of those other genres, the lyrics were thrown out or reversed on appeal, but not when it comes to rap and hip hop. It's another example of how a particular group of people from a particular community continues to be targeted as part of our justice system. Think about where rap came from. It came from the dust of burning buildings in the Bronx. It came from and was born from government neglect and disinvestment, not just in the Bronx, but all over the country. These were young people who were left to fend for themselves, left to scratch, claw, fight, and die for limited resources in their communities. They formed gangs, they roamed the streets, fights and murder were commonplace, and it was them, not government officials, local or national. It was them who decided there was another pathway to get us out of this. It was them who signed the peace treaty. That's crazy, right, Dad? These young people signed their own peace treaty in the Bronx and said, let's stop the violence, let's stop the fighting, and let's begin to compete using this beautiful art form that they manifested out of thin air. We're talking about a community in which the political system at the time sought to destroy it and continues to many ways underfund it, take resources away from it, and seek to destroy it. And that community used this art form to find their voice. Find their voice. They found their voice through MCing, b-boying, graph writing, DJing, and through their overall style. You want to know how important it is for a community or a nation to find its voice. What is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? Freedom of speech. America would not be a nation and could not be a nation. It would not ratify the Constitution without the First Amendment. So these are young people, black, brown, from the hood that found their voice. They found their voice and then went on to build a cultural, social, economic, political movement that has transformed the world and impacted and touched every one of our lives here today. But as we have seen throughout history, when you consider the racial and economic demographic of this population, we've seen America, politically and economically and socially, continue to target this demographic. Whether it was Jim Crow, black laws, lynchings, redlinings, the war on drugs, monopolies, or hip hop. America continues to be at war with black and brown communities, particularly low-income black and brown communities. And so the RAP Act is a response to this. It's a response and seeks to push back against the unjust way in which our legal system has been weaponized against the culture. 500 cases over a decade. Other genres not even close. We have to protect black art. We have to protect freedom of speech. And personally, this art form, this culture, this movement was the father I never had. I grew up with a single mom, 4 sisters. My father wasn't around. I saw black men in the community, television, wherever I can find them, to give me some guidance in how I should live my life as a black man. I was lucky. I was raised during the so-called golden age. So I had Run DMC. I had Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick. But the reason why I'm standing here today is because I have Rakim, Karis One, Chuck D, X-Clan, Big Daddy Kane, specifically. So this is not just music. This is, as I mentioned, a cultural, let me say, revolution that has helped millions, billions of young people here and globally to gain knowledge of themselves and find themselves. So we got to protect art, black art, and we got to push back. So thank you for being here. It's going to be an incredible conversation. I spoke a little longer than I wanted to. So let me thank and bring up my brother in the House of Representatives, who is the co-author of this incredible bill, Representative Hank Johnson, representing the great state of Georgia.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been in Congress now for, this is my 9th term, 17 years. That's about as old as my colleague Jamaal Bowman is. And I say that figuratively because we know he's older, but we come from different generations is what I'm trying to tell you. And, you know, it was, I got involved in this rap thing based on 21 Savage being locked up by ICE on a Saturday night before the Super Bowl in Atlanta. It was because that prior Wednesday, Savage had been on the Jimmy Fallon show, and he rapped about, one of his raps had to do with immigration and border security. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was right in the midst of Trump, and Trump cracking down on Muslims and, you know, that kind of thing. And so it has always been my suspicion that ICE coming after Savage 4 days after he was on Jimmy Fallon was related to the content of his rap. And, but anyway, I was called upon to help extract him. And so the folks who called upon me were folks affiliated with my man Prophet right here, who went on to found the organization known as BMAC. And BMAC has made, you know, protection of Black artists its mission. And also the idea for the Rap Act came from folks at BMAC. So I want to thank Prophet for that. And he resulted in some legislation being drafted. And me, having been around here for a minute and having observed my friend Jamaal Bowman and seeing his energy as a school principal, I mean, I've seen the man on the floor of the House treating Congresspeople like they were the elementary school students that they were acting like. And he's getting them in line also, you know? And so I said, I got to affiliate with this young man because he is our future. He is the one that's going to see this thing through. And really have to work with him. And then, you know, Kevin Lyle sits on this panel. He is right in the thick of why the Rap Act needs to be passed. The Rap Act, ironically, protects all culture, but it's only Black culture that's under attack. And the Rap Act is a response to that attack. We're under attack in the courts. Supreme Court all the way down to Fulton County Superior Court and courts, state courts across the country where, you know, hundreds have been charged, hundreds convicted, and we know of 500 appeals that involve people convicted based on the use of rap lyrics against them. We know of 500 cases, so there's probably 5,000 more that we will never know about because there was no appeal. There was just a guilty plea. And so this is a rampant issue. In Fulton County, you all are following the Trump case, right? The RICO case. I've read all the indictments. Young Thug, Trump, and the 18 others. And each of those 18, each of those 19 are charged with specific criminal acts that are a predicate to the RICO overall conspiracy. That's not the case in Young Thug. Only thing in that indictment, the RICO indictment for Young Thug is his lyrics, which are said to connect everybody. But, you know, that's wrong. And we have to do something about it. So that's why Jamaal Bowman and I filed the RAP Act, which will put up some guardrails to prevent prosecutors from overreaching and antagonizing and inflaming the passions of jurors to convict folks just because they think that rappers are rapists and robbers and drug dealers and murderers. I mean, rap artists do talk about that, but the fact that they talk about it doesn't mean it's true, that they are involved in it. Just like someone directing a movie or writing a movie script. You know, just because they wrote that, or you're acting in the script, doesn't mean that it's real, it's fiction. Come on. And a lot of money is being made off of it. And the same folks that will make money off of it are the same ones that put you in jail to prepare the next crop to come along, to be chopped down and used for whatever purpose. So it's bigger than just rap, but rap is under attack. Rap artists are under attack, and we could stop it by passing the RAP Act. And so I appreciate the efforts of everybody on this panel in pursuit of that objective. And now it's my esteemed pleasure to welcome to the podium our moderator, none other than attorney extraordinaire, entertainment attorney extraordinaire, Shay Lawson.
Thank you, Congressman Johnson, Congressman Bowman. Before we get started on the panel, I actually want to introduce our panelists. We aren't going to be before you long. We'll treat this like church. I want y'all to know that we won't be up here long, right? But I want there to be some interaction. I want there to be, if you have questions, I don't want you to leave here with them. I want you to really take the opportunity for who you have here on the panel, and that's why it's important for me to introduce them so that you understand who they are and how they can speak to the issues, so that when you go back and you leave the conference, that you feel confident about supporting this or having your members support this. All right, the first person that I want to introduce, Congressman Bowman introduced himself. I mean, gosh. All right, so we'll move on to Kevin Lyles. Ability to create and build some of the biggest and culturally relevant brands over the past 30 years cements his place in cultural history. With titles such as chairman and CEO of 300 Elektra Entertainment and co-founder and CEO of 300 Entertainment and head of 300 Studios, the company's content and film division. In 2020, Kevin was named to Billboard's Executive of the Year for his work in artist development and activism. He holds a place on Variety's 37 New Yorkers Making an Impact in Entertainment. And beyond impacting the culture through music and entertainment, he spearheaded the Protect Black Art movement, which works to protect creative expression and First Amendment rights of artists. Everybody clap it up. Next on the panel, we have Prophet, who is an activist and music executive. He is the CEO of 50/50 Music Group Management, a management and consulting company. With activism in his DNA, Prophet began working in the social justice space when he was just a teenager. However, in 2020, Prophet co-founded and is the chair of the Black Music Action Coalition, which is the BMAC you heard about earlier. BMAC is an organization representing over 200 influential artists, managers, lawyers, and music executives whose mission is to eradicate systemic racism within the music industry. Next, we have Professor Dennis. Professor Andrea L. Dennis joined the University of Georgia School of Law faculty in 2010 and was appointed to the John Bird Martin Chair of Law in 2019. She came to UGA from the University of Kentucky College of Law, where she taught courses in criminal law and procedure, children in the law, and family law. Her scholarship explores criminal defense lawyering, race and criminal justice, criminal informants and cooperators. Her book, Rap on Trial, Race, Lyrics, and Guilt in America, has received national attention, and courts nationwide have cited her research on rap lyrics and criminal evidence. last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Eric Nelson, who is a professor of liberal arts at the University of Richmond, where he teaches courses on African American literature, hip hop culture, and advanced writing. In addition to his scholarly work, he writes regularly for The Times, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, and Rolling Stone. He has been the lead author on 3 amicus briefs for the Supreme Court, which included support from artists such as Killer Mike, Chance the Rapper, Meek Mill, and is frequently called to testify as an expert witness in cases involving rap lyrics as evidence in criminal cases, and is the co-author of Rap on Trial, Race, Lyrics, and Guilt in America with Professor Dennis. Everybody welcome. All right, I am going to move to sit down so that this is more of a family feel on the group discussion. Test, test, test. All right, Representative Bowman, we are going to start with you and just talking about the RAP Act in general, because this isn't the first year it was introduced, it's the second year it's been introduced. And so over the course of time, from last year and even through this year, what are some things that you feel are misunderstood about what the RAP Act is?
Mic check, here we go. So first and foremost, the RAP Act is not a get out of jail free card. It's not a get out of jail free card. Brother Johnson mentioned something called guardrails. So those guardrails are essential before we consider using rap lyrics as part of a trial. So a judge in a pre-trial hearing would have to determine if the lyrics should be admissible or not. That was not the case, and that hasn't been the case. There would be prosecutors introducing lyrics that got nothing to do with the crime an individual, so-called crime an individual was accused of, that would be introduced. And once the jury would hear these lyrics, it would prejudice the jury, and then the defendant may be identified as being more likely to have committed the crime, even if the lyrics had nothing to do with the crime they were being accused of. So this bill seeks to ensure that there's some pre-trial analysis to make sure that the guardrails are where they need to be, so that if a judge does allow lyrics to be admitted, he can inform the jury as to why the lyrics were admitted and how to listen to and interpret the lyrics. One other thing I want to mention, I know the authors will probably speak about this, the idea of expert witnesses. So not only were judges allowing prosecutors to use any lyrics, like, let me just give you an example. Let's say I was accused of a crime today, whatever crime it may have been a heinous crime. And, law enforcement found an old notebook of rap lyrics I wrote 5 years ago that they wanted to admit into courtrooms as part of the case I was being charged for. That was being allowed in courtrooms across the country. And if I wrote so-called violent lyrics and I was accused of a violent crime, then the jury would hear that and say, oh, if he wrote those violent lyrics, he must be violent. It must be more likely for him to have committed this crime. That is insane. So the RAP Act is not a get out of jail free card, but it puts up the guardrails and forces prosecutors to actually do their job and find better evidence and make quality arguments. And so that's what it is.
Okay, so I actually want to move the next question over to Professor Dennis, because the point that you bring up about having guardrails and having there be a nexus to a crime, having you describe that and say that in a trial, in a court of law with actual attorneys, that someone is presenting lyrics that have nothing to do with the trial at hand and saying, hey, I just need you to know this about this person. Professor Dennis, what put this on your radar? I read that you began collecting data on this in the early 2000s. What originally put this on your radar to say, this is worth looking into? This isn't just a single case.
Sure. So first, just thank you all for inviting me to participate in this. So I think in short, right, early 2000s is when I stumbled across the issue when I was an assistant federal public defender in practice. there was a client in the office who, in the course of a search of his vehicle, law enforcement had recovered some CDs. So this is the era in which we're talking about CDs, right? And produced those as part of the discovery. And so that was the first I had ever encountered the issue. And then fast forward a few years later, and I began to research the issue in about 2006 when I entered academia at the University of Kentucky. And a colleague told me of another case happening nearby, and I obviously recollected back to the case from the early 2000s and realized, well, that clearly was not a one-off. And so I began to do some research and found at least dozens of cases at that time. This was pre a very robust internet. So for those of you who are younger, just imagine a world in where it was much harder to find public records and cases. And so at that time, I published an article, but there had already been some social science written about the issue as well, exploring some of the potential bias. And we, or at least at that time, I documented 1991 as being the earliest case that we could find. I do want to actually, putting aside my stumbling across the issue in the 2000s, point out that I think as of now, we think the earliest case is 1989. And that case involved a young juvenile who was under the age of 18, accused of homicide. He was convicted and sentenced to life without parole for other reasons. His case came to light within the last handful of years. But what we found when his case came to light was that he had written in his notebook, his school notebook, right, some lyrics from artists that he really liked. He had just, copied them down and written them in his notebook, and they were used in his case by the prosecutor in order to argue that essentially he was dangerous, he was a threat, he had a criminal mindset, right, which led ultimately to his conviction and a life without parole sentence for someone who's under the age of 18. And so early 2000s is when I stumbled across the issue, but I think it's fair to say that this issue has been happening at least 30, almost 35 years, if not before then. Again, as you've heard, it's very hard to find cases. So there could be an earlier case that we just have not uncovered yet for any number of reasons.
Thank you. Dr. Nielsen, in the database at the Rap on Trial website, it shows currently when you download the Excel sheet that there's 683 cases of rap lyrics being used in trials. And Professor Dennis just mentioned that there might be other cases. And earlier when we were talking, I'd like for you to kind of go into that. What are some other instances of numbers that we might not be able to account for?
Yeah, and well, also I want to echo the thank you very much for including me, but also for your advocacy. I guess he's not here anymore, but Representative Bowman. It's right, we know, to your point about our database, we've got close to 700 cases, but I do want to emphasize that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have access to, usually the access we have is to a case that has gone to trial, has an appellate record, that type of thing. But the vast majority of cases don't go to trial, right? They result in a plea deal. If it's a juvenile case, we're not going to have access to those records. If it's an indictment, we're not going to have access to those records. So at 700, that's conservative isn't even the right word for it. It is only a drop in the bucket. And it's especially concerning because of, and I think some folks have already alluded to it, how egregious some of the uses of these lyrics are. Representative Bowman, what he described where a prosecutor might bring in page after page of lyrics written years before the alleged crime and don't even mention the specifics, that becomes character evidence, which you're not supposed to be bringing in. But prosecutors have found that it is very effective. In addition, I testify in cases across the country at both the state and federal level. And time after time, I have seen prosecutors, with the help of a gang expert, bring in this young man's, and it's almost exclusively young men, this young man's rap lyrics without even realizing that those aren't even his lyrics. He's copying down lyrics from what Dr. Dre, whoever his favorite artist is, because they're so clueless about the art form that they're bringing it in, and that's the need for an expert. And to sort of provide a counter narrative, I want to just give one example to sort of put a face on it. Back in 2001, There was a young man from New Orleans named McKinley Phipps. He was born to a family of artists. When he was young, he used to read poetry at coffee shops. And then as he got older, rap started taking off, and in particular, Master P and his No Limit label started taking off. And so what he saw was this opportunity to use his love of words, his love of poetry, to make money. So he's widely regarded as the best lyricist on the label. One night he goes and does a show at a small club. There's a fight that breaks out, someone is shot and killed. So although witnesses described somebody very different looking from Matt Phipps, although there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime, although the person that did match the description that the witnesses gave walked into the police station and confessed, the prosecutors decided to target him. And they targeted him, again, without any evidence. And one of the ways they did it was they took lyrics from 2 different songs that he had written, spliced them together as if they had come from the same song, altered words to make them sound more threatening, and used that to convict him. And he was convicted 10-2. You could still do that then. And he was sentenced to 30 years. He served 21 years for a crime we know he did not commit. And it was only because Governor Edwards in Louisiana gave him clemency that he is out now. That type of thing, however egregious it sounds, it's not egregious. It happens all the time, and that is what's egregious.
Wow, thank you. To Professor Nielsen's point, Kevin, I want to go to you because he's saying this is mostly young men that this is happening to. And Professor Dennis mentioned that the earliest case is 1989 that she knows of. He's talking about No Limit. You've been in the industry over the span of decades. Can you tell me at what point do you think you realize, I think my artists are being surveillanced. I think my rap artists are being surveillanced, and is that not true? Have you noticed it across genre?
When we started making a lot of money. And in all seriousness, whenever people of color or minorities get to a position of power, it doesn't have to just be rap, but rap was so big that this issue started, I think, in '83, and it's been going on because they want to take us down and they want to get us out of power. You know, we're the #1 most consumed music in the world right now. We're the only business that will give a loan to a young man or a young woman who has a dream, and they don't have to have backup for it or anything. So I got all these micro businesses. So I'm saying I'm making more multi-millionaires than any other thing. And they're doing it with Black and brown people. So there's a conspiracy to hold us down and put us in the place they want us to be, because we're so powerful. And now that we're affecting their kids, and you go to a concert of Rolling Loud that you guys went to, 85, 90% of them are white. So now we as a culture, you gotta think, Malcolm X could have been a rapper, Martin Luther King could have been a rapper, you know, any of these guys that were way before us, because I believe the kids now, they are the prophets. They are the new messengers of what's happening. And what happens to a messenger when they get popular? What happens to an artist, a preacher, a pastor when he gets it? And so to me, it's it's not just rap artists. So I'm on Sunset. You love the story that I might have told you before. I'm on Sunset, me and Redman, Reggie Noble, in a car. I'm actually driving and I'm training the guy out there. So I leave the club about 12 o'clock, and you know, I'm from Baltimore, so I'm like, why is this car following me? So I said, Reggie, how much weed you got on you?
Let's be honest.
I'm very clear what's going on here. He looked at me. I said, yo, start crumbling. So, you know, something's going out the window. It's having 30 years on there. So I'm like, yo, let me turn. So I turned, and the car turned, and I said, yo, you done yet? He said, no, I got like 5 more minutes. I'm like,
5 more minutes.
that's crazy as she was. So, you know, it wasn't legal back then, you know what I mean? So we're going, and the next thing I know, on Sunset, all of Sunset gets shut down. All helicopters, planes, I mean, it was just not cops, but so a driver, throw your keys. I said, oh shit. Now I'm thinking it's going to go down. You know what I mean? Luckily everything's gone, whatever. I put your hands out the window. I said, sir, I have a pager. Scott's all back there. Had a pager. It might fall. It's not a gun. Now I'm thinking that I'm reading everything in my head. Right side patch I read. Get out the car, walk back, I get rushed. I'm on Sunset Boulevard. Hands out, I was 320 pounds. They said, put your arm in your back. I said, it can't go. I'm too much shit on me. I can't get my arm back. So gun to my head and everything. They line us up, lock us up. We're sitting on the sidewalk. And then someone, wrong car. So when you think, now listen, I have money, this and that, I got all credentials and everything, but it's an attack on Black and brown people. It's not just, it's just, if you don't look like them, if you don't act like them, if you come from a place that they're attacking us, and it has to be to a point where we got so much power, but we now have to lobby and get laws in place to protect this very issue. Young Thug, Jeffrey, and 28-something people, they cannot provide for their family. You see, I want to humanize it. He's not a rapper, he's a father of 6 that he can't father. He's a son of a mother who has health issues. He's the leader in the community that actually said, little baby, you shouldn't do this. Come be an artist. Gunna, 21 Savage, he's a beacon of hope and light, but they gotta dim the light. They gotta dim it. They had Gunna in there because he was around. That's what the RICO charges us to say, hey, let me just put it all in there. Somebody gonna tell somebody. Somebody gonna do something. And they finding out that even though Thug might have been around people allegedly that he did nothing. And because he wrote the lyric said, I'm king of, I'm slime or something, whatever, I'm king of slime. That's the leader of the gang name. That's because he's King Slime, he's the leader of the gang. So he's sitting in jail. You can resurrect on the Capitol and get bond, but you can't be poor and be a rapper and get bond. It's crazy.
Thank you. This is a perfect segue to you, Prophet, because you have been doing this work. You are an activist, and just understanding and giving that context of more stories like what Kevin is talking about. And I remembered when we did this last year at the RIAA, and Representative Johnson did his introductory remarks. He talked about how back in the 60s, when they would have news telecasts and they were trying to instill fear in neighborhoods, about Black people, it would say, Negro man robs woman, Negro man rapes this person, Negro man found so-and-so. And that if you listen to the news now, it's rapper found here, rapper arrested, rapper found to, where it is the new dog whistle for where we are in America. And Prophet, can you speak to America's history of censorship of Black art, Black expression, as opposed to other communities?
Well, thanks, Shay, and everyone for having me. Look, the reality is that racism is a very real issue in this country. It's a 400-plus-year-old issue in this country. And until we deal with that shit in a real way, there's going to be always different forms that they use to ensure that racism stay alive and Black people stay at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. This is another attempt to ensure that the prison industrial complex has a steady flow of subjects to carry out its design. The reality is that Phil Spector when he was on trial, rock music and pop music was not on trial. I don't know what Young Thug did or didn't do. What I do know is for all of the shit you saying he did, there should be a whole lot more you got than some lyrics. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know what the brother did or didn't do, but it would seem to me that it was all of this shit going on, that we would have more to work with than lyrics. So this is, to Jamal's point, this is not about, Congressman Bowman's point, this is not about whether or not someone did the crime. This is about stop attacking our culture. Stop criminalizing black people. Stop criminalizing black men. The same reason Thug is in jail is the same reason they pulled Kevin's car over. It's the same thing. There's been a war on black men since we got here. There's been a war on black family since we got here. So the fact that they can rip black families apart, the fact that they can describe us and categorize us as these animals to the world because of art, the art that is reflective of a society that we didn't create. If you want to change lyrics, change the conditions that these young people grow up in. You sitting here telling me about what a man is rapping about when there's people dying and there's drug-infested neighborhoods and we don't have health care and we don't have an education system and we don't have decent housing. What do you think you're gonna rap about? But then now you use that as a admission of guilt? It's absurd. And I would say this, Congressional Black Caucus, it's interesting that you be here. I remember, and one of my mentors is in the audience, Donald Brown, I remember him bringing me here when I was 14, 15 years old. And the CBC wasn't fucking with rap. No, you know, it was a serious disconnect. And may God rest his soul, Reverend Calvin Butts. When I was 15, me and him we went to war. And I stood in front of the steamroller when he tried to steamroll those tapes in Harlem. And my appeal to him, which later we were able to come together on, was listen, man, forget what them folk talk about. This is your children. These are your nephews. These are your daughters, bro. Damn what the media is talking about. If we're gonna have a conversation about how we get better, how we mature, let's have it as a family. So my appeal to the CBC, now that hip hop is at 50 years old, something that many of you thought would not have been around past 3 or 4 years. It's now one of the greatest cultural expressions we have in the world, one of our greatest exports. As the VP said a couple weeks ago at her crib, that it's one of the greatest exports we have is hip hop culture. We have to protect it. I was so proud when Kevin launched Protect Black Art, because people, I don't know if y'all seen him sit in trial when they had him up on stand. And they was asking about, well, you know, you want bail for this guy, and it's gonna cost X amount of dollars. Kevin said, well, first of all, the guy's a multi-millionaire, he has the money. But secondly, I got the damn money. All right, I'll make sure security's paid for, whatever y'all talking about, the money's good over here. And they still did not let the brother out. So all I'm saying is, if it's about crimes, go get some evidence and do what you gotta do. But keep the culture out of it.
Professor Dennis, I want to get your opinion, especially as a former federal public defender, for the audience who may not really understand. How can this use of lyrics, the way that we've described, how does it impact due process and the right to a fair trial?
So, you know, as researchers, we think about the lived experience, and all of this has been an expression of the lived experience, what people are going through when this particular tactic is used, or the phenomenon, which is all very important, obviously. For those who are focused on the legal hooks in particular, I think that's the question you're predominantly asking. And so I want to take it beyond just due process. Due process, many of us have probably heard of, right? Due process, the concern that the criminal legal process or criminal legal system is actually operating in a fundamentally fair way for those who are accused. right? That's one particular concern, but I think it's also important to keep in mind equal protection, right? Has been discussed, right? We understand that other musical genres, other art forms are not used in the same way, to the same extent, if ever. And so that raises, I think, to my mind, an equal protection concern too, that people, Black and Latino, in particular male, who are accused are being treated fundamentally differently from other individuals who could also be dealt with in the same way, but are not. And so I think you have to think not just about due process, but equal protection, right? There's obviously the First Amendment we've talked about as well, which is another legal concern that is significantly important. To what extent does the First Amendment offer any protections or shield for the criminal legal process is a subject of, well, I think it should be a subject of serious debate. There are many who would say it offers no shield, no protection, and I think that is subject to contestation, which I think is part of the conversation we're having here, that rap music and other Black cultural art forms should be protected as strongly as they can under the First Amendment, but I think also evidence rules. So for those who are interested in thinking about the criminal adjudicatory process, the evidence rules are fundamentally important to that process, to creating hopefully accurate, reliable, and legitimate outcomes. I think another underlying theme we've heard here is that there is a serious amount of illegitimacy in the criminal legal process. That's probably not a shocking statement to many of you in the room, but this is another aspect of that the system becomes illegitimate when you're using Black cultural art forms and expression to incarcerate individuals. And so I wanted just to make sure that we point out when we think about due process, equal protection, First Amendment, the rules of evidence, because it's not just one particular legal concern, it's a number of legal concerns that all implicate the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of the system. I think you've heard things from everybody here about what those particular claims look like. I'll sum them, and we don't need to talk about them, or I don't need to talk about them at length, but injecting race into a process that claims that it is race neutral, right? And whether we are talking about leveraging express biases of fact finders, decision makers, or unconscious biases, both are happening because of the lyrics and the coded language and the visual representations that are injected into the process. It's allowing highly unreliable evidence, as Eric indicated. The government experts who translate, for lack of a better term, lyrics, who interpret them for fact finders and jurors, are essentially unqualified to do so. Right? They have very little experience or background or knowledge with Black cultural art forms, Black cultural expression, and in particular rap music. And so that's another particular concern that raises due process concerns, right? You're injecting fundamentally unfair, unreliable, inaccurate evidence into the system. If you need an analogy, we probably wouldn't let these same government experts translate a foreign language. But yet, that's essentially what is happening here. And then I think to cap it all off, and Eric mentioned this in particular with Mac Phipp's case, right? All of the inaccurate, unreliable evidence that is racially based, right, or ethnically based, right, is allowing for prosecutors to make inflammatory arguments for fact finders, for decision makers in the cases. You see closing arguments and arguments about the admissibility of evidence, essentially saying these are bad people, dangerous people, criminals, thugs, animals, right? It is allowing them to make highly inflammatory arguments, which actually do violate also due process, right? So putting aside even the evidence, then now you've given the prosecutors tools to make highly inflammatory, unfairly biasing arguments, all which is delegitimizing the process. And so I think we need to think broadly that this particular type of legislation affects a number of different potential legal concerns and hopefully minimizes them.
Thank you for that. I want to bring it back to you, Representative Bowman, because last year, California, Louisiana successfully passed legislation preventing the use of lyrics as evidence, and we saw a number of state bills being brought in your home state of New York. We had Missouri, we had Maryland. With many states moving on this issue, why was this a legislative priority for you at the federal level? And why is it important for your colleagues to join as co-sponsors?
Well, federal legislation has the platform to become leading legislation that states can then adopt and follow. In this particular case, I heard about it initially. I heard about California, what California was doing, but I actually heard about what was happening in New York. And we connected with legislators in New York, and then Prophet, and then Hank to draft our bill. But the federal government has the bully pulpit, right? And whenever we introduce legislation, it gets a ton of coverage across the country. And even before the legislation is passed, it begins to change the consciousness and the conversation in courtrooms around the country. You know, when they see that this is happening at the federal level, it gives a little bit of pause even before moving forward with legislation at the state level. So there's a big bully pulpit here, and we have a big bullhorn where we can talk about this issue and bring it to the CBC, have panel discussions like this, and then mobilize. We have people in the audience from all over the country who can then mobilize and go back to their state legislatures and lobby their members of Congress to get involved in making sure we pass legislation at a federal level, even though that's only dealing with federal prosecutions. It needs to happen at the state level as well. I want to piggyback on what Kevin said about power earlier, if I may, just quickly. You know, you have people like me, a generation of newly elected officials who came of age during hip hop culture. And much of our perspective, our ideology, and how we govern is rooted in what we learned in hip hop culture. I mean, when I talk about hip hop as being part of my identity, I did not learn about knowledge of self or Black history and culture or what happened to my ancestors in our school system. I learned about it from hip hop. So when, you know, Nas, just to use one artist, when Nas talks about, you know, before we came to this country, we were kings and queens, never porch monkeys. There were empires in Africa called Kush, Timbuktu, where every race came to get books, to learn from Black teachers who taught Greeks and Romans, Asians, Arabs, and gave them gold rings. Gold was converted to money, it all changed. Money then became empowerment for Europeans. The Persian military invaded, they learned about the gold, the teachings, and everything sacred. Africa was almost robbed naked. Slavery was money, so they began making slave ships. He goes on and on, right? So now you got members of Congress who have that knowledge itself embedded in our DNA. So when we govern, not just as it relates to hip hop, but as it relates to criminal justice reform overall, as it relates to affordable housing, as it relates to education, as it relates to climate change, healthcare, any issue rooted in social justice and pushing back against white supremacy, it's in our DNA. It's not just a talking point. It's not something we learned in school. It's something that is who we are. And that's 14, 12 bars of one song by one artist. You have hundreds, thousands of artists all over the world speaking truth to power about the issues in their lives, in their communities, to Prophet's points. So we are gaining not just social and economic power, but political power. Now, once you start gaining political power with people who are unapologetic in who we are, what we're trying to do, it's a wrap. White supremacy is over. Because we're not afraid. We're not afraid at all. I mean, again, my role models are Chuck D. KRS-One and Eric B. and Rakim. Who am I going to be afraid of? Right? And so that power piece is a critical piece. And it's hip hop, and I'll close with this, and you know, Kevin and I and Prophet and I talk about this all the time. Hip hop has yet to fully realize its political power. Bills like this give us the opportunity to organize federally and locally with a singular goal in mind towards building political power. The hip hop dollar is worth trillions in the global economy. What if we took 1% of that and invested it in winning electoral elections federally and across the country? And that's just the money side. That's just the money side. When you got artists like Meek Mill, Quavo, T.I., Nas, and so many others, many of them were here this week. So the political power is already being built right now. They were here this week talking about everything from gun violence to wealth inequality. They were at the White House meeting with the VP. That's the kind of political power we're building right now. This bill can be a central piece to that. We obviously need everyone's help in the audience to make this happen.
Thank you. We are at time, so that is a perfect way for us to wrap it up. Even though we are at time, I do want to give an opportunity, if there are maybe one or two questions in the audience, we'll quickly take them. Is there one? Is there? I'll get you in the pink, right? Ma'am? Yep.
I don't know if I have a question.
Uh-oh.
Because I feel like with our for those of us who are in Democratic districts, we are sometimes preaching to the choir because we are out there and we're supporting bills like the RAP Act, which are so critical to our community. So for those of us who are in those Republican districts, you also have to join the fight, even if you are not supporting that candidate. Go out there anyway and advocate, because we need 50+1 to make this happen. And these type of issues are so critical to our communities. And I want to thank the congressman and the panel for making this such an important issue for us. And let's get it done.
Thank you. All right.
It's a Democratic and Republican issue. This is about freedom of speech. And this is the part that we have to understand. Forget rap music. This is about protecting the freedom of speech. Bottom line.
I just want to say one other thing, and thank you for that comment. There has been some momentum on the Hill in terms of Republicans having an interest in signing on to this bill. So that is a good thing. It's beginning to be some momentum because, again, at the end of the day, this is a free speech issue. That free speech is important to Republicans, it's a priority for them. So it's not a Democrat-Republican thing, as it was said, and that's why I was able to pass a legislature like Louisiana. Right, that's a great example of that. Can we take two quick ones?
Yeah.
Here and there, right behind her. Yep.
Hi, I appreciate what you guys are doing. I have a question about, there's a lot of people that didn't look like me that helped my career. What are you guys doing to integrate people that don't look like us in this effort? Because you mentioned that the concert had more Caucasians there at the rap concert than African Americans. So what are we doing to get people that don't look like us, educate them about this issue, and get them on board with supporting us?
Well, that was, I mean, we can tell you that the Rolling Loud is one example of that. I mean, you have 200,000 young people. As Kevin pointed out, 80% of them are white, right? But those were the same young people that was in the streets in 2020 protesting. And those are the same young people that will be in position in the next 5 to 6 and 10 years. So we were able to bring this issue straight to those young people. Bowman got on that stage right before Ice Spice. All right? Hank Johnson and Bowman was opening acts for Ice Spice. And for the 70,000 young people talked about the RAP Act. All right, we had activations set up all over Hip Hop 50 Yankee Stadium. We had the RAP Act activation set up there. We had it at Rolling Loud. We have them set up now for 10 Rolling Louds for the next 2 years. We're building out huge activations to push this issue. Because to your point, racism didn't start with black folks. All right? It ain't on us to fix either. So it takes the reach across the aisle, finding your allies, and then pointing them in the direction of what to do that's not performative, that's going to actually lead to sustainable change.
And I'll add to that. If you look when we took out the 2-page article in the New York Times, this is the only issue that the whole ecosystem of the entertainment industry signed on to. YouTube, so, to get any of these guys to do anything, you talk to most CEOs of these companies are not like us. So they actually sign, I'm a publishing companies, CB, any Viacom, any big, everybody signed on to this because, like Bowman said, like he said, it's a freedom of speech issue. And it's the only time we've passed a law as an entertainment industry collectively together. So we're reaching, listen, I'm learning about so many left wing, right wing, center fly organizations. But as long as we can get to because I believe really all real human beings want to have a space where we all can operate in. I mean, truly, I believe that. And I believe even some racists are not really racist, that's how they grew up. It was, and I believe these little kids that these little white kids that's listening to us right now, they go home. And their parents might not understand what they're doing, but they have the friends over. And then eventually, they're gonna be parents. And so what people are afraid of right now is these young white kids, they're growing up hip hop. So, oh shit, they might vote hip hop. Oh, and what does hip hop look like? So that is a big issue, but we reached across both sides.
And I want to say, Kevin, that was very expensive. That ad, listen, that 2-page spread was extremely expensive. All right, no one donated that shit he got. He dealt in them pockets he got. So that's another thing. We can't just talk about it. You have to actually really get involved and not do what's performative. He felt this was an issue. He galvanized the community and went into his pocket to ensure that messaging was out to the world. So salute to Kevin for that. Real talk.
The other thing that I want to add to this is, and before we'll have our last comment here with the gentleman with the hat, is that to Kevin's point that the entire industry signed on, and when we say that this is a First Amendment issue, when we're talking about protecting creative expression, we're not just saying rap. Right now, rap is being targeted. But as we've talked about before, country is just as violent as rap is, right? We don't see Stephen King, who writes in gruesome detail about murders being brought to trial. You know, Johnny Depp was on trial for supposedly being an abusive drunk, and he's played an abusive drunk pirate in 2 movies, but the movie industry wasn't on trial. But we understand the harm here, and that harm is understood across industries. So we do have the Screen Actors Guild, we have the Writers Guild, we have the Actors Guild, the Authors Guild. They are all on board with this. So it is a wide campaign that is protecting all creative expression, because rap, as Dr. Nielsen said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So if it's us today, who is it tomorrow? So if you don't protect us, because it's just happening to Black and brown people, it's only a matter of time before it's you. And so it's a bipartisan issue. It's an everybody issue. It's a community issue. It is a First Amendment American issue that everybody should be able to get behind.
Excellent.
All right, I want to get to our last question.
My name is Kevin Meggett. I'm from the Bronx. I'm from Edenwald. I'm the largest housing development in the Bronx, second largest in New York City. I want to thank you guys because I came here very prejudiced on this issue. And I actually, I'm still on the fence. I'm still seesawing because I'm interested in reading your book, for starters, and I definitely would love to read the bill. But prior to coming here, I called a few of my friends. You know, he's Congressman's golden age hip hop era. I go to the embryonic stage. So the first person I called was Melly Mel. Hey, how do you feel about this rap act? Because I did a little research on YouTube. He's like, I don't know enough about it, but I'm not in favor of it. I called Grandmaster DXT, same thing. I called King Son, and I called a few other people. And so, like, one of my biggest issues is this. Where I'm from, their drill rap is a major, major issue. And a lot of people from Edenwald are YBs. Yep. People from White Plains Road are like YGs. Yep. And they drill down on each other. And so we sitting here saying First Amendment, First Amendment, First Amendment. But if I kill someone, and I go in the studio and I brag and I say how I killed this person, that's not free speech. Someone paid for it, and they paid for it with their lives. So I'm on the fence about it, and that becomes a national security issue. And then I guess to my brother Kevin Lau, like I thank you for being here, but one of the challenges in hip hop is we have to start like talking to the young gens, the new generation of hip hop artists, and see how can we change the messaging. I mean, we market and promote. What is hip hop just so one-sided that we're stuck on drill?
And it's two conversations here.
Prophet, let me just say one thing before you go.
Let me finish.
Yeah, just finish.
Just make my last point.
Yeah.
Are we so one-sided when it comes to drill that there are other artists, there are Nas's, there are artists that are like Nas, Kanye West, blah, blah, but we're not marketing and promoting it. And as a collective, if we could get all of the CEOs together, I guess what I'm getting at is we need to, you were talking about Nas, right? Well, and you was talking about the nation of gods and nerds. What we have to do is build on refinement. We got to build on refinement to push that next gen that's going to change the messaging, which could eventually change the culture again, because everything is evolving. And you got to be honest and say, oh, well, this, like, you look at 2 Live Crew and you look at NWA, and that was a First Amendment right. But, you know, technically, how did that really work out for us as a community?
So
With that I yield.
Yeah, so just quick response, and thank you for the question. So if the key word I used at the very beginning was guardrails, and something else I said very clearly, first words out of my mouth, it's not a get out of jail free card. If you kill someone and you go into the studio and rap about it, you deserve to be held accountable for that. Straight up. Straight up. It's not a get out of jail free card. What has been described multiple times is that's not how it's going down, right? That is not how it's going down. And I'll let Kevin and Prophet speak a little bit about some of the other things you mentioned, but that piece there, you remember.
I thank you for that.
It's not a get out of jail free card. You do something, you held accountable. The other part of it, though, in terms of drill rappers in particular, young people in our community, you know me very well. You know me for many years. You know my background is education. You know young people are my life's work. So absolutely, anyone who does harm to the community should be held accountable. To Prophet's other point, we are not investing in, enriching, and supporting the most vulnerable communities in America. We continue to neglect them, which continues to produce people who commit harm against the community. So, whoa, you got a long soliloquy. Now you gotta let us respond. So it's both and. How are we, this is just one bill with one particular issue, right? We need reparations in our community, a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So like, there are other bills that deal with that, and there's work that we have to do, and Kevin has been doing this work for his entire career, even though it's all not public on the front page, he does it, and I'll let him speak to that, and I'll let Prophet and the other one speak.
Our music, we were kids when we were born and made hip hop. We're 50 years old now. So a lot of us are pulling our pants up. A lot of us are sitting across, like you can see what Hank John, all this title stuff. My man Hank, like him reaching down and Jamal reaching up, you know, it's because we're all older now. And I have to tell you, I'm a father of 4. I come from, where I come from, it's like, whether it's drill, whether it's drugs, it's what was there. I survived it. And so what I'm personally doing is every conversation, I'm 39 years in this business. Every conversation you talk about, because when Flavor Flav said 911's a joke, he was the only one strong enough to say it. He was on drugs. When I see it and I tell you what I used to do in the street, and now I got a street named after me. So that kid who's on that corner, he look up and hi, who's coming out? And he Google and he see I raised $250 million for Morgan State and HBCUs. You see, I got a program So I can't, I'm not God, but I'm gonna do my part because he woke me up to do it. So I'm not, these are not, like I said, these are not rappers to me. They're future fathers and mothers, and you have to invest in it, because my son makes mistakes. So what you're saying that an artist who grew up in a community that's kill, 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 blah, 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 he's not gonna make a mistake, he's not gonna rap about something that he say, he's not gonna drill down, that shit is gonna happen, but that's called life. And my challenge to you is, I'm not raising your kid, yo. You get your community, you get your people together, get the fathers together in the community, and go out in the streets and have them snap them kids up and say, don't drill down on each other. That's right. Don't put it on music. But I'll be there to help you. I'll raise some money for you too. I'll be there.
And I'd like to just quickly add to that. I'm from the South Bronx as well. I'm from Melrose Projects. And K-Flock and that whole movement, Be Love, that whole thing going on, warring with Wall, the whole nine. Young guy in my hood, Melrose, named Noah, about 10 years ago, about 7 years ago, was killed, which started the whole drill movement in New York and that whole beef. If you rap about it and that leads a prosecutor or the district attorney to evidence to lock your ass up, then you should go. Bottom line. See, there's a two-part conversation we having. You got the forefathers of hip-hop who talking about where the culture is going as a whole, right? And whether they like where the culture is going as a whole, right? Whether Melly Mel can appreciate OIG or K-Flock, right? That's a different conversation. That's intergenerational. That's a conversation that you have with your mom and pops about the outfits you wear, about the shows you watch. You know, that's that conversation. And so we shouldn't confuse the two. We're talking about whether or not it's enough to just have a lyric as the only form of evidence to prosecute. That's what we're trying to stop. That's it.
And I would say that I've worked on over 100 cases involving rap as evidence, and I have yet to encounter the scenario that you described. I am not saying it doesn't happen. I have yet to find a case where it was clear that this person was rapping about a crime in detail that he committed. Again, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I haven't seen it yet because that's not really how it's working. What I do see as I work on these cases is I see the trends emerge, patterns. And one of them is that almost exclusively, these young men will say, I am doing this to get off the streets. I am doing this to build a better life. I am doing this to provide, and that includes drill rappers. They're saying the exact same thing, that this is what the market wants, and so that's what I'm going to give them. The bigger question is, what's wrong with the market? What's wrong with the culture? That's a different, but that's different. What I would say is that the story that Congressman Bowman started with about the origins of hip hop, what Kevin talked about with people like Young Thug bringing other people up with them, that is what I see in case after case after case. And it does start to feel like a trap because you have these young men who are in circumstances and almost in very few opportunities for upward mobility. And when they actually avail themselves of one of the few that they can, the door gets slammed on them. That's what I see over and over, and that's been true from the beginning.
So, because I'm a legal scholar and former lawyer, let me bring it back this way, right? I know the conversation is about rap music. As was mentioned, this is much more broad. It's about creative expression, and in particular, Black or other forms of creative expression by people of color. As you'll see in the book, which I do hope you have a chance to read, we begin by explaining that this is a modern form of a long-standing and hundreds-year-old process, right? So when enslaved people, my people, right, were here and drumming was a form of communication, that was immediately criminalized, right? Gathering to have conversation, right? Celebrations, dance was criminalized. We can continue to move forward in time and see that every form or virtually every form of Black cultural expression has been criminalized or has been used as evidence. And so what the concern now is this is a modern manifestation. So putting aside that, we can talk about the criminal legal process, right? So many of us know for quite some time, it was perfectly acceptable to refer to Black people, usually Black men, by the N-word in court, right? By any other racial pejorative, right? Then somebody decided that was unconstitutional, right? Then we moved to referring to them by animalistic references, right? By other coded language, right? Right? We figured out, well, okay, maybe that is also problematic, right? And so what we have moved forward in time essentially is now to a modern way to continue both the criminalization and the dehumanization of Black people in the criminal legal process, and with respect to the First Amendment. And so I think I do understand, and I hear you, right? I have a 12-year-old, and I've got debates in my mind, right, about what I want him to listen to. I am the age of hip hop. If you go by 1973 as its origin, right? And so I do hear you, but I also keep in mind that it's part of a larger pattern in this country of criminalizing Black culture, of using racialized imagery and epithets and tropes and stereotypes in the criminal legal process, so that even if an individual would be found guilty because there is plenty of other evidence, that this is being used to send it over the top in ways that are completely unfair. I mean, I think the short version of what Eric was saying is, if there were sufficient evidence otherwise to convict the individual, you don't need this evidence.
If you do need it, don't bring the charges.
And this, one last thing.
Everyone, I know that we are grossly over time. Kevin, I'll give you, and then we'll swing it to Rep. Bowman.
Yeah, just to
final
give
word.
you guys an update on what's happening with YSL. The Thug has been in for 18 months, and still we don't have one juror picked. One juror picked, because the community's like, why I can't not put him on trial because of lyrics. Not one juror has been picked yet. So please pray for him, pray for his family, pray for all those people, and I even want to pray for Fanny, because I think she knows what she don't know. And I know I shouldn't really talk about it, but she's going after Trump to make sure that the Black people love her, and she's going after YSL to make sure the white people love her. Period. That's it. Only reason this happens. So God bless you guys. Thanks for coming out.
Come on, y'all. Come on. We'll do altar call in a second.
Congressman would like to have a minute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let me fix my shit.
So thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful to all of you for hanging out with us, and I hope the conversation was informative. So grateful to you, Shay, Kevin, the whole crew. Thank you all so much. But we have to take action. So please contact your member of Congress. Tell them to take a look. Ask them to take a look at the RAP Act. Please let them know that Representative Johnson and Bowman are leading it. Ask them to take a look. We also need a Senate lead. So please contact a U.S. Senator, have a conversation with them, have them take a look at the bill. Also, finally, take it back to your states, contact state legislatures, have them take a look at a similar bill as well. Again, this is about justice. This is about making sure our system works differently than it's been designed to work for so long. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.